Let's trace the path of food through the body. Of course, we start with the mouth, then the food moves to the esophagus, then the stomach, then the small intestine. There's 3 parts to the small intestine. The duodenum is connected to the stomach. Next is the jejunum, and then after that is the ileum. The ileum is connected to the large intestine. I want to talk about the small intestine, but we're going to need to talk about some accessory organs in order to talk about the small intestine. Let's look at why. I think of the small intestine as like a vat or a cook pot, right? We have to add our ingredients to that vat. We have to put the food in there, and then we have to put chemicals for digestion in there. And then once it's all mixing together, the digestion process will complete, and then absorption will complete. I guess the absorption part doesn't fit my vat analogy, but the other stuff does. When you're cooking, the pot itself doesn't put the chemicals into it, right? So the same thing is going to happen in the small intestine. There's a lot of chemicals that will be released into the small intestine that are going to help complete the process of digestion. But the small intestine is not making those chemicals. So these chemicals are things like pancreatic juice, which is full of enzymes, and bile, which helps to digest fats. And these things aren't coming from the small intestine, they're coming from other organs. So these are what we call accessory organs. In order for the small intestine to function, we need these accessory organs, namely the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. These organs actually never have contact with food, but they are important for the digestive system. They are releasing substances that are necessary for the small intestine to function properly. Let's first take a look at the pancreas. One of the things that I think is very interesting about the pancreas is that it has both endocrine and exocrine functions, which is unusual for a gland to do both. So endocrine means it makes hormones released into the bloodstream. Exocrine means that it makes something other than hormones, and that something is released onto an epithelial surface. In this case, it will be the epithelial lining of the duodenum. The pancreas is basically located behind the stomach in the upper left abdomen. So a lot of times when you're looking at a model of the digestive system, it's hard to see the pancreas because it's hidden behind the stomach. So in the image here, the stomach has been removed so that we can see the pancreas. There are some certain parts to the pancreas that we should know, like the pancreatic duct, which is what it sounds like, a duct that's going to carry, in this case, the exocrine secretions, right? So these exocrine secretions we'll talk about in more detail in a little bit, but they're basically mostly enzymes and buffers. And the pancreatic duct is going to take these substances to the common bile duct. And so the pancreatic duct and the common bile duct merge together, and they basically are merging together right near a structure called the hepatopancreatic sphincter. So sphincters are muscular doors, right? Pancreatic because there is an input from the pancreas. Hepato means liver. There will be an input from the liver too. So that's why it's called the hepatopancreatic sphincter. And the hepatopancreatic sphincter is a door between the duodenum and that common bile duct. So when that door opens, the substances from those ducts will enter into the duodenum. Substances like those pancreatic enzymes and buffers. In terms of the functions of the pancreas, I already kind of talked about these, but we can be a little bit more specific. I did mention there's an endocrine function to the pancreas. So what that means is the pancreas actually produces 2 hormones, insulin and glucagon. These hormones are really important for regulating blood glucose levels, but they don't really have anything to do directly with the digestive system. Instead, they're really important after the digestive system has pretty much completed its activities. We call this post-absorption is when we need these, right? So after we have absorbed our glucose, that's when we are going to be using the hormone insulin, right? Because insulin is going to help us to lower our blood sugar levels. Much later in our fasting state, so several hours after your last meal, that's when glucagon will become important because it helps to increase your blood sugar levels. We talk more about these in another video. The other function of the pancreas is the production of pancreatic juice. The pancreatic juice, as I mentioned before, will get secreted into the duodenum. Let's take a closer look at the pancreatic juice. Basically, it's made of enzymes and buffers, okay? So it contains what we call pancreatic enzymes that are going to be needed to digest carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. Amylases are a common carbohydrate enzyme, so these help to break down carbs. Lipases, of course, are going to break down lipids. Nucleases break down nucleic acids, and proteases are going to break down proteins. So there's a whole bunch of variety of these that are going to be found inside the pancreatic juice. What causes the release of these enzymes is actually a hormone called CCK, also known as cholecystokinin, but nobody wants to say that 10 times, so we just call it CCK. We're going to talk more about CCK in another video, but this is actually a hormone that's released by the small intestine itself when the food first comes into the small intestine. And that CCK will then go to the pancreas saying, hey, pancreas, time to squirt out some enzymes because food's in here and we need to digest it. The other major component to pancreatic juice is buffers, including bicarbonate. And the buffers are really important because if you think about it, what's coming into the stomach, what's coming into the small intestine from the stomach is very acidic because the stomach had all of that hydrochloric acid mixing in with the food, right? So we call that substance chyme, the substance that left the stomach and entered into the small intestine. And chyme is very acidic. The problem is these pancreatic enzymes we just talked about, these are made out of protein like all enzymes are. And most proteins need to function in a somewhat neutral pH environment. There are a few enzymes that can function in an acidic environment, but the majority of enzymes need that neutral environment. So this chyme is very acidic. We have to neutralize it so that these enzymes don't themselves become denatured by the low pH. The pancreas is going to release these buffers in response to a hormone, just like the pancreas releases enzymes in response to a hormone. But it's a different hormone. This hormone is called secretin. Secretin for the fact that it's going to cause secretions to come out of the pancreas. Secretin, like CCK, is also released by the duodenum when food enters into it. When food comes into the duodenum, the small intestine releases the secretin into the bloodstream and it goes to the pancreas and it tells the pancreas, hey, we have very acidic chyme inside of the duodenum. Please release some buffers. And that's kind of how it works. And again, I talk about these enzymes, these hormones in more detail in another video. Next up is the liver. The liver is a really large organ. It takes up a large amount of space in the abdomen, and it's located in the upper left portion of the abdomen. The liver has a lot of different functions, and a lot of these functions have nothing to do with the other functions of the liver, which makes the liver very hard to study from a student perspective. What makes it easier at this time is the fact that there's really only one function of the liver that's directly related to digestion, and that's the fact that the liver produces a substance called bile, which helps to digest fats. Just to give you an idea of some of the other functions of the liver, these include detoxification. So a lot of times what happens is there's toxins in our food, and all of our freshly absorbed nutrients go from our intestine directly to the liver via something called the hepatic portal vein, and the liver filters through it looking for toxins and removes those toxins. And then that detoxified blood will be released back into circulation. The liver also is very good at storing fats and fatty substances like fatty vitamins, for example, so our fat-soluble vitamins. And there's a lot of other ones too. Anyways, we're going to talk about bile though. Bile is actually made by the liver, but it's stored in the gallbladder, and the gallbladder is located basically just on the inferior surface of the liver. Bile contains basically two things, bile salts and bilirubin. One of these is functioning and the other one is an excretory product that we're trying to get out of the body. So the bile salts are the ones that have a functioning role. The job of bile salts is to emulsify fats. Emulsification is the process where we can mix fats in with water. We need to do this because we have to digest the fats using things like lipases, which are enzymes. Enzymes are made out of protein. Protein likes water. So these lipases are existing in a watery environment, but the fats obviously don't like water. So how do you get the two to come together, right? This is where emulsifying products come into play. An emulsifier is something that can cause fats to mix into a watery environment. We use emulsification products every day. Mayonnaise is an example, right? Mayonnaise has fat and water in it, and there's something in egg products that acts as an emulsifier, which allows the fat and the water to mix together in the mayonnaise. Maybe you've actually seen, if you didn't use your mayonnaise for a really long time, some of it starts to separate out, the water and the fat, and it's kind of gross. Probably should throw that out. But when we use dishwashing detergent, right? Like Dawn or something, that actually is an emulsifier because it helps to remove the grease, right? And it takes the grease and allows the grease to mix into the watery environment so we can wash it away. Another great thing about the bile salts is not only do they help to emulsify fat so that we can digest them, but we can actually reabsorb the bile salts and reuse them. So the bile salts are actually reabsorbed by the small intestine, and then they're sent back to the liver, and they can be used again and again and again. The other component to bile is bilirubin, and we've talked about this in other lectures. We talked about it specifically when we were learning about red blood cells and what happens to them after they die. Red blood cells are mostly filled with hemoglobin, the protein that's used to carry oxygen. When the red blood cell dies, we can reuse the protein part of hemoglobin in the cells of our body, but the heme portion, sometimes it can be reused, but a lot of times we have to get rid of it. Heme eventually becomes this bilirubin, right? And the bilirubin is put into our small intestine via bile. As the bilirubin moves through the small intestine, it eventually makes its way to the large intestine where we have a lot of bacteria, and the bacteria will actually convert the bilirubin to stercobilin, which is brown, which is why poop is brown, and I think we talked about that in another lecture too. Bilirubin itself is kind of yellowish green, which is why the gallbladder is often colored green in images, because actually sometimes it does look green, but it's actually a yellowish green. When we have an excess amount of bilirubin in the bloodstream, like if you have a problem with your liver, if your liver is not appropriately taking up the bilirubin builds up in your blood, and then the bilirubin ends up in the tissues of your body, like your skin or the whites of your eye, causing them to become slightly yellow, and that's what we call jaundice. Some structures we should know associated with the liver are the hepatic ducts. So hepatic means liver, so these are ducts that come off the liver and are going to carry bile, and we have a right and left hepatic duct. The right and left hepatic duct merge to form the common bile duct, right? And we talked about the common bile duct a couple slides ago with the pancreas, because the common bile duct is going to merge with the pancreatic duct right at the hepatopancreatic sphincter. There's another duct here that's important though, and that's the cystic duct. The cystic duct is a branch coming off the common bile duct. And what's going to happen is you're basically constantly making bile, and the bile goes down the hepatic ducts into the common bile duct, and then it hits that hepatopancreatic sphincter, which is going to be closed if you're not eating. So most of the time you're not eating, so most of the time it's closed. The bile backs up in the common bile duct, and it's forced to go into that cystic duct, which leads to the gallbladder. So basically you're forced to store that bile in the gallbladder. When you are eating, the gallbladder will contract and the hepatopancreatic sphincter will open, and we'll get a lot of that bile to go into the duodenum to mix with food. Now we're going to look at the gallbladder, and I pretty much said all of this already, so let me just pick some of the things that we haven't gone over yet. Like for example, it's the hormone CCK, that cholecystokinin, the same one that's released by the small intestine that goes to the pancreas and tells the pancreas to release enzymes. That same hormone, when it's released by the small intestine, it goes to the gallbladder and causes the gallbladder to contract. And that same hormone also causes the hepatopancreatic sphincter to relax. So when we relax the hepatopancreatic sphincter, the bile can enter into the duodenum, and as the gallbladder contracts, we're going to squeeze more bile into the duodenum. And of course, at the same time, the buffers and enzymes of the pancreas will be coming in too. I already talked about jaundice, but something we haven't talked about is cholelithiasis, which is basically gallstones, right? Gallstones they can build up because wherever we have like a high concentration of salt, that salt can crystallize, like come out of the solution and basically form rocks. So when this happens, we can have problems with the gallbladder. And one of the ways that this can be taken care of, can be treated, is with a cholecystectomy, which is the fancy name for removal of the gallbladder. The gallbladder is one of those organs that you don't have to have in order to live. Lots of people have their gallbladder removed. The liver just basically takes over for the gallbladder. I mean, the gallbladder was just storing bile anyway, so basically the bile just backs up to the liver now rather than getting stored by the gallbladder. So it's sort of an organ that almost is more problematic than it is helpful in some ways. Take a look at this picture here and see if you can label these numbered items. These are pretty much all of these numbered items are things that we've talked about in some way, shape, or form in this class. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can identify some of these structures. I'm going to go in numerical order. Number 3 is referring to the right and left hepatic ducts. Number 4 is therefore the common bile duct. 5 is the cystic duct. 6 is still the common bile duct, actually. 7 and 8, so those are close together. There are some structures we didn't discuss, which are labeled on here, but we can just call 7 and 8 the hepatopancreatic sphincter. I'm telling a little white lie there, but good enough for us. 9 is, of course, the gallbladder. 10 and 11 are both the liver, ultimately. 12 is actually the spleen, believe it or not. 13 looks like to be the pyloric sphincter. 14 is stomach. I'm sorry, 13 is the lower esophageal sphincter, excuse me. 14 is the stomach. And, oh, you know what? I wonder if 6 was supposed to be the pyloric sphincter, because maybe 6 is referring to that area between the duodenum and the stomach. I'm not really certain. It looks to be right on the duct, though, but the pyloric sphincter is in that area, too. Where were we at? 15. 15 is pancreas. 17 would be the pancreatic ducts. 18 I don't see an arrow for, so we'll skip that one. 19 is the duodenum. 20 is going to be jejunum. And 21 and 22, those ones you might not have gotten. Those are actually kidneys.